Hi, welcome to Perception, How Markets Decide. I'm Sarah Kemp, and I'll be your host as we explore how authority really shapes market behaviour. For the past 2 decades, I've led global communications programmes for FTSE 250 and venture-backed companies through periods of intense growth and inflection. And in that time, the digital landscape has changed, being completely rewired. And right now, I think we'd say we're in an escalation of that evolution with AI. In this series, we're going to unpack how reputation, risk, AI, influence, and commercial perception interact to decide who wins the modern market. Most B2B companies think the moment they launch a report is when it starts working, but in reality, it's usually the moment it starts disappearing. Teams spend months building research, gathering data, shaping insight, and then treat the launch as the finish line, not the starting point. And earlier in my career, I was very guilty of this. But as my experience broadened, I started to realise that it was a pretty big commercial problem. Not only that, but having cut my teeth in PR agencies, when I eventually moved in-house, I saw a huge problem with different marketing disciplines working in silos. And I also became disillusioned with how PR was being measured. How I say it, it was always the naughty child at the boardroom table that no one knew what to do with. And I've spent years thinking about this. With the advancement of AI, we're finally able to give PR a voice at that table. Stay with me as I explain why. If you've ever worked on a B2B report, you probably recognise this pattern. You collect the data, you analyse the data, you build the story, you align all of the stakeholders, you'll brief your PR agency, you'll plan the launch moment. And when it goes live, there's a burst of activity. It's really exciting. You might get some coverage. Social engagement spikes. The team feels really, really proud. And for a few days, maybe a couple of weeks, that report feels visible. Then the attention fades. The conversations stop. And the report quietly sits stagnant on your website. And if you think about it, it's complete madness. You know, that report that the team put their best work into is valuable. But if there's no activity to sustain it, you're missing out on its commercial potential. Let's put it this way. That report might have cost, let's say, £60,000 in research, design, and agency time. It might be the most single differentiated asset your company owns. And yet, after 30 days, it fades while the team places focus on a new idea. Then there's another problem. The flagship report is usually a PDF. And what does that mean? Readable by humans? Yes. But to the AI models and LLMs your buyers are using, so ChatGPT, Gemini, Perplexity, all of them, it's invisible. So, when a buyer types a question into an LLM, a question that your report answers perfectly, it doesn't cite your company. It cites whichever company structured their insight properly for an LLM to read it. And a fun fact for you. Frista's 2024 Buyer's Journey survey found that 89% of B2B buyers have already adopted generative AI, and they rank it as one of their top sources of guided information at every stage of the buying process. And the core issue? The launch creates a spike, a little bit like a dopamine hit. We all love that, don't we? But building authority requires persistence. And because a spike is when the market notices you, yeah, sure, but as there's so much noise out there, it's likely you're forgotten as quickly as you're noticed if you don't sustain. And in fact, a large-scale study by market research company Focus Vision found that the average B2B decision maker consumes around 13 pieces of content before they sign a contract. And that's across vendor sites, search, and social. Which means if your report appears once and then disappears, you've participated in maybe one of those 13 moments. But your competitor, who reinforces their insight repeatedly, participates in 6. And B2B buyers don't act the same way as consumers. For a start, there's a buying committee, and they don't make high-stakes decisions based on something good they noticed once. CMO Council data shows buying committee content gets shared from the middle out, the bottom up, and the top down almost equally, which means different people see different fragments of your story. And they make decisions based on the good things that keep showing up consistently, whether that is in articles, search results, sales materials, in AI-generated answers, because it feels trusted, established. And if they see it once at launch and never again, it feels like marketing. And that distinction is where most B2B teams lose commercial value. So let's think about it this way. Imagine you're working on a launch. Inside your company, it feels huge. Emails, dashboards, stand-ups. But outside those four walls, it's just one more signal in a ridiculously noisy environment. Let's think about this. Think about a B2B report that you didn't work on. Perhaps it's just a brand you like or one you remember. But do you remember the day it launched? Do you remember any of the data points, any of the insights? Who the spokesperson was, perhaps? Can you actually even bring an example to mind? And there's a concept in behavioural science called the availability heuristic. We don't choose what's best. We choose what feels most available in memory. If your report launched once and your competitor's insight keeps resurfacing in articles, search, AI answers, and sales materials, guess who feels safer? Then we come to the age-old marketing versus sales problem. Marketing frustrated that sales teams aren't using the content that they spend hours on, and sales teams frustrated that marketing just aren't delivering the leads that they need. When your insight stays visible, sales can use it as evidence. It becomes proof that your perspective exists beyond your website. And by the time a buyer speaks to sales, they've already encountered it somewhere else they trust. And in that scenario, sales isn't introducing a brand new idea because they're just reinforcing something that the market already recognises. Deals then start with more momentum and less risk. And in enterprise environments, that difference can mean a 90-day cycle instead of 150, can mean fewer procurement objections and protecting margin instead of discounting to compensate for doubt. But when the report disappears after launch, the opposite happens. Sales has to do all of that credibility work from scratch. And you can see how they get annoyed with that, right? Because they're carrying both the story and the proof alone. And that slows down cycles, it increases internal scrutiny, and it makes it easier for a much more established seeming and trusted competitor to win. Most reports fail because the visibility isn't sustained and because, structurally, they're invisible to the systems buyers now use to make sense of the market. In the next episode, we'll look at how buyers actually shortlist vendors before they talk to sales and why visibility without credibility just quietly wastes budget. Until then, please do remember that perception shapes reality and credibility shapes perception. If you want to hear more about why authority decides, who gets chosen, subscribe to Perception, How Markets Decide, and share this with someone who owns that big report where you work.